Okay, we're recording. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar. This will be episode 216, Fall in Love with Research, because today is actually Valentine's Day for those celebrating. I am not, but hopefully you got or gave some delicious chocolates. And before we introduce our guests, I just want to, of course, remind everybody to please subscribe to our YouTube channel at CX-CC. Check the events calendar for other super cool webinars that we're doing, cxcc.to/events. And of course, joining our Patreon, which has a totally free version, or you're welcome to do the paid version, up to you. But of course, I want to take a moment to thank all of our paid Patreon members who are generously donating to my content universe. So thank you. And hope you're finding some value there. I'm certainly trying to deliver some. So today we wanted to do kind of a my job UX researcher and get three fantastic researchers here to talk about some of the realities of working in research. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Let's start with Lade.
Hi everyone. Hi Debbie. Thanks for having me here. My name is Letty. I am a researcher and I've been doing research for the past 7+ years. I'm currently based in Amsterdam, but originally from Nigeria, which is where I did most of my research career. Yeah.
Super fantastic. Thank you for staying up late with me for this show. Joel, tell us about you.
My name is Joel Barr, and I'm a user researcher with FIS Global. Been in the business for going on a decade now. Nice to be here.
Thanks for dropping by. And Dr. Roxana, sorry if somebody else is doctor and I didn't know. Dr. Roxana, tell us about you.
It's okay. You can drop the doctor part, but nice meeting you, everyone. Thank you for having me, Debbie. I'm Roxana. I'm also a UX researcher joining from Ottawa, Canada. I could say it's really cold, but it's way less cold than I want it to be. And in terms of research experience, one thing that I want to share is most people kind of assume the digital part of it. I love working at the intersection and kind of also going into the physical. So I'm doing also research around housing and neuro-inclusive housing and things like that. So if anyone in the room is passionate about the physical aspect of it in particular, reach out after.
Great. Yeah. And also, people who are joining live, you're welcome to put your questions in the chat room. I will be moderating and asking some questions. But first, let's imagine that somebody watching this doesn't really know what a UX or user researcher does. How would you explain it to them? I'll start with Joel.
How do I explain? It's like digital anthropology. Um, the technical term I always tell people if I really want to sound fancy is that I'm a digital human factors and cognitive ergonomics scientist. Um, and people go, "Oh my God, what on earth is that?" Well, I pretty much study humans and their digital tools, but I want to sound fancy and highfalutin, as it were. And so that's the line I tell them.
Your fancy is showing. Okay. I like that. Digital anthropology. Lade, what about you? How would you explain to someone who doesn't really get what you do?
So I think about it like the explain like I'm five thing.
Yeah.
And the way that I've figured out how to explain it is that I help either businesses or people or teams, somebody, a group of people to understand people and their problems so that they can create useful, usable, delightful, enjoyable, great experiences and solutions for them. And this can be physical, digital, services, a space, whatever, but just helping people understand the people who are going to be using whatever they're trying to create and the actual problems that they have so that they can make something that is useful.
Super excellent. Like that one too, of course. And Roxana, how would you explain to somebody who doesn't get what we do?
Well, that's a little hard after two experts saying it, but I'll say, I'll pick on what you say, Lade. I really like it, it's talking to people, really talking to people, extracting insights, and packaging in the right way for the depending on the audience. And the thing that really bugs me is the user part, because those people could be users of a product, but could also be your stakeholders or the company leadership and so on. And that's the part that I really think it depends on the organization you're at, what it means to be a user researcher.
I like that. I want to jump off that for a moment because sometimes we hear or we're fighting on LinkedIn about, well, user research. That seems easy. You just find some people and talk to them, right? How would you respond to you just find some people and talk to them? Lade, do you have an answer to that one?
Yes. So I like to give this example of how people think that anyone can just do research because they're just asking questions, but it's because the impact of doing it wrongly doesn't always show immediately.
Ah.
And you have this feeling like, oh, it's so easy. I just asked this person a question. I just sent a survey. But when you think of something like a developer writing code, if it's bad, you see it immediately. If you think of a doctor who is doing surgery, if it's bad, you know immediately. You don't have to wait. And so it's like helping people understand that there's a skill to it. Anyone can learn to do it, but anyone can just go do research, right? You have to learn the skill of doing research to do good research that is actually useful. Otherwise, then you're making terrible mistakes. And then I go on to share like examples of where people did research terribly. My favorite go-to example is the Walmart example. I don't know if you know the Walmart example, but that's my go-to example. Yeah.
Got it. And that's the story where they redesigned their aisles or something because
Yes, based on
people.
a one question survey that was basically yes, no. And they lost like $1.8 billion or something because of that.
Yeah, right. It's one of those articles that's easy to Google. That's a great one. Roxana, we'll go to you next this time. We'll mix it up a little. So again, if someone says, oh, you're one of those UX researchers, well, you just talk to people. Anybody can do that.
I completely agree. It's an art and a science, but really people skip the science part. It's not enough that you get along with people. You have to find the right people. You have to decide who the right people are. Like actually, this today I had a conversation with someone. I looked over their research goal and asked a few questions like, well, is it acquisition or retention? Well, if it's one, then you're looking for a group of people. If it's the other, you're looking for another group of people. There can be an overlap and so on. But that matters, right? So it depends on how you do it and what you asked and how you interpret what you asked, right? It's not that easy. I've spent if it were that easy, then I really got ripped off in my master's and PhD. I want my money back.
That's another good answer. Joel, over to you. Anything to add here?
I mean, just to back up what the other two panelists said. To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever been called out in that way to my face. Um, I think the biggest thing that I find that other people struggle with when they try to do my job is uh, formulating proposals and uh, composing the right questions to ask users in a way to drive them towards action and not just saying what's on their minds. Um, I'm of the Larry Marine school, right? I think users do more than what they say, and I think that if anyone could do that, then measuring it, our users would be far more efficacious in the how we design products, whether they be physical or digital. But we don't see that.
Feel you there. Okay. I want to ask a fresh question. And of course, if you're joining live, we'd love to get your questions. If you're watching the YouTube video later, put your questions in the chat and give us a YouTube thumbs up, please. Always helps us in the algorithm. So I want to ask people a little bit about the real life day-to-day work of doing research. So we're going to kind of ask this as a few different rounds. So first, I want to ask a little bit like in a typical week, what types of things might you be doing in your job if it's a typical week? Roxana?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because as Joel said, I said talking to people, and that can be a little bit misleading because it's not just talking, right? It's talking, it's observing, is facilitating, whether it's a workshop, a group, or whatever it may be. So really being with people in different capacities is kind of how my week would look like. And then the individual work, whether it's secondary research, whether it's analysis, whether it's synthesis, whether it's you know, doing the stats and so on. So yeah, I think one thing that it can be difficult sometimes is the back and forth between I'm in a group with people, or at least one person, and then I have 45 minutes, let's jump on analysis, then there's another conversation. So that attention switching is a big part of it during the week, I'd say.
Thanks. That's a good point. Lade, what about you? Typical week. What kinds of things are you doing?
I feel like I've never had a typical week in my years of doing research, because it has always looked different in every company I've been in, and the how large the team is, how many products I'm working on. Because mostly I've almost always been the only researcher or the first researcher where I've worked, and everywhere it looks different depending on the size, the kind of company it is. But more recently, in my most recent role, which is my current role, even in the 2+ years that I've been here, my week looks different, but it looks like doing a lot of customer conversations. I go to customer sites. And currently I'm in B2B. And so I go to customer sites to see, or even non-customer sites to ask questions, to see what is happening. So like what Roxana said, it's not always just like talking, it's also seeing, watching things. And also in the past couple of years, I've also gotten more hands-on with like product analytic tools. So I'm in like Mixpanel and Hotjar. So my work is always around, if I were to like sum it up to like, this is like the broad overarching theme, it will be like I'm always planning research or conducting research or analyzing research or sharing insights or planning research. I'm
Or
always doing
everything?
one of those, at least one of those three things, because there are times where I'm doing all three things at the same time. And I think the last part that is also very interesting that has come up more often in the past 2-3 years is around like connecting insights. So sometimes I'm not doing the actual research, other people are in some way, or I'm just pulling insights from different places where there are insights, might not necessarily be from research, but it's like, oh, customer support said this, or sales said this, or so connecting all those insights together that might lead into a larger research project or lead into something else, workshops, those kinds of things.
Okay, that's a full job. Joel, what about you? If you have a typical week, what does it look like?
Well, so like like Eddie said, there are no typical weeks, and they're either dead quiet or they're rushing about like chickens with their heads cut off. I've often thought of user researchers as being the Zen masters of spinning plates. And so we get our plates spinning up, and they're on little wobbly, little wobbly rods of bamboo, and product people and engineers and developers and things like that go walking past and going, those are going to fall at some point. You know that, right? And we just look at them and go, oh, no, they're fine. Oh, sure. Okay, there we go. That one's good. Um, you know, for me, uh, as a user researcher, and for those of you thinking about getting into the field, because that's who this is meant for.
Partially, yeah.
Yeah. So every user researcher follows a process, right? And it mine typically looks at three stages, right? Three big buckets, if you will. Um, One is pre-planning, right? So pre-gaming. One is doing the actual user research work itself, and then the analysis and reporting is the last bucket. And in any given week, I could be doing any one of those things depending on which team I'm talking to. So then there's a process right there, right? So in any given week, I could be planning research with product teams or engineering teams, right? Because we user researchers are great silo busters. We blow right through silos. So teams, it doesn't matter which side of the team we're working with, right? We could be talking to engineers, we could be talking to product people, salespeople, CRM, whoever, marketing even, and planning research. In another stream, we could be actually doing user research. That's in any different number of methodologies. And then in another work stream, I could be reporting out or doing analysis, and just following that process cyclically over those teams over and over again, rinse and repeat.
Well, I definitely wanted to also ask about some of the good things that tend to go on in your work and some of the not great things that tend to go on in your work. But we've got questions from the audience, so I'm going to jump into those. Ana Lucia asks, following the name of this episode, Fall in Love with Research, did you have a moment when you realized you had fallen in love with research, or any moment when you really loved what you were doing and it really stuck with you? Who can anyone think of the answer? And I'll go in the order of people who can think of it. Roxana's unmuting.
I have a personal answer, I think, and a bit of a confession. Ana Lucia, pienso que la cuestión es brillante. I'm passionate about behavior change, and I've been applying it in my work. And I've worked at a healthcare consultancy working with apps around behavior change, whether it's diabetes, epilepsy, and so on. And I know the textbook definition for pretty much everything. My background's in cognitive neuroscience. I talked about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and I could wake me up at 3 a.m. I'll tell you all about it. But I don't think I got it until I got pregnant. And I don't drink water. I drink coffee. My body, something's wrong with it. I don't know that I need to drink water. Like, I need to be forced. And I was probably drinking less than a cup of tea, or even none, just coffee with milk. The second I got pregnant, I switched to 2+ liters that moment that I found out, and never went back. And I've been every New Year's resolution as I drink more water. It's made it on my list since I was 12, and it didn't happen. That's when I understood intrinsic motivation and ultimately the value of the right research that can have. But pushing people with nudges and notifications and all kinds of things, if they don't have the right kind of motivation, which you're only going to discover through really good research, then it's not going to work. So I think I fell in love with research a long time before that, but that's when it quantified in a very personal way.
Thank you for that very personal story. Joel, I think you unmuted after. Did you want to talk about when you fell in love with research?
Or
it fell in love with you?
Well, I actually think that I fell in and out of and back into love with research over and over and over and over. I remember the first time when I saw a product be changed by research. I was working with supply chain folks at Lowe's Home Improvement at their headquarters. Those interviews were transformational because I walked in thinking, supply chain? How fucking boring can you procurement? Please. How boring. Nope. I mean, to tell you, I was head over heels at that point. Those guys had been with that company for 40 years, 30 years. They're just timeless service. Had the families involved in it. They're super blue collar. And they were, there are times when you interview people and they'll just sit there and they'll do one or two things. They'll either tell you what they think and not what they do, or they will bitch for the full hour about everything going on in their lives and about their work. And those guys were the only ones I'd ever seen up until that point that did. They were focused on doing. And it fundamentally changed the entire way I went about doing my work. Because from that point on, I began to drink the Kool-Aid around useful functionality and away from, tell me what you think about this box, or some of the stuff that you ask when you're just starting out and they hand you this portfolio of business, and they're like, okay, well, you'll find some users to talk to, and you're just like, okay, I can do it.
Yeah, thank you, and say hi to your dogs from us. Lade, when did you and research fall in love?
So I think for me, it was from when I was in undergrad. So I wanted to study psychology because I wanted to become a therapist. But then when I started studying psychology, I was like exposed to the research side, and I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I was more interested in the research side than going on to the therapy. And then that was really what drew me into research. And then when I really, really, really fell in love with research, because for me, it was not just the applied research that I cared about. I just cared about knowing things and helping people know things. But then when I fell into research, in love with research more on the applied side, was when I was working on a project around voice interfaces, and I was doing research with people who were new to the internet or had never been on the internet, and it was such a mind-blowing experience for me in terms of just how asking the right questions and using the right methods could uncover so many things that people had never thought about or considered, and can just change your worldview and how you do things going forward, and just how tangible just asking good questions, what it can result in. It was one of those experiences that I've never forgotten, and it's been like 5 years plus since then. And it was just when I was like, yeah, this is definitely what I enjoy doing and see myself doing for the foreseeable future.
Got it. I wanted to mention quickly, I'm also a researcher, and I'd like to say I've been on a lot of podcasts lately, and people ask, like, oh, did you want to do this when you were little? And I said, when I was little, everyone thought I was going to either be a psychologist or a lawyer. And the good news is I'm both.
What's funny about that? I had a book when I was a kid, and it was put out by the Walt Disney Company. It was called The Home of the Future.
Oh, sure.
And it
Isn't it the Monsanto Home of the Future?
I have no idea.
Okay.
It had a kid, and this was the narrative. He would wake up in the morning, he'd sit up, and he'd start his computer. Now, in this book, the computer was ginormous. And he basically ran his entire day from his computer. Turned on the lights, started the coffee, took the dog out, the whole bit. And when I was a kid, I thought, I want to be that kid one day. I want to be able to do that somehow, some way. And it ended up working out that way. And I will never forget it. That was the first time I started thinking about, how do you get to that point? And then I lucked out and ended up, in a job where I shaped the very programs that kid would run on his computer, and that helped run his day. And I never forgot about that.
I feel like you and I would have so many stories like that. We'll have to do a separate episode. Like, I was so influenced by early Epcot and other stuff. Separate episode. Okay, back to, we have a question in the chat. I apologize. I'm usually bad at pronouncing people's names. I mean, even Ana Lucia has an accent on her name, and I mispronounce it all the time. I'm so embarrassed and horrified. So, hello, Ugochi. Thank you for joining us. And if you want to write it phonetically and help me out, please let me know. But the question is, as a UX researcher, do you stay involved involved throughout the process of designing a product or service from the beginning to the end? Or as soon as your insights are used, are you sort of pushed aside? I'm curious as to how involved you get to be in the entire process. That's a super one. Let's start with Lade.
This is a very, very great question because yes and no. It's very tricky to think about the thank you. It depends. It's very tricky to think about like when is the beginning of the process or when is the end of the process in like a real life team that is not like a project that you're working on for fun, because there's no beginning and there's no end. It's a product that already exists most of the time. Most of the time we're joining a team where there's already a product, after saying the work that I've done. And sometimes there may be a new product that they want to spin out or a new feature or something that is new. But for most of my work, especially being the first researcher most of the time, is a lot of like actually fighting to even be part of the process, which is very interesting to me because I'm like, why then did you hire a researcher if you will not listen to me or let me be involved? But it's usually a lot of like, this is why I need to do the research so that you can actually build something that is useful and usable and people need and want to use, and you can then make money because people will use it. So you can be involved in the whole process of like the ideation of what that solution might look like because you have done the foundational research to understand what the issues are, to the point of like we're building it, we're designing it, we're testing the designs, we're testing if this is we're testing the concept to see if it makes sense and if what we're designing works with what people expect for it to look like. And it can also be like we've launched and we're looking at like the analytics to see what are people using, where are the issues, and then continue to get feedback about how people are using the product and where the issues are so you can keep improving. But it's not always such a smooth journey and process, especially when you're the only researcher on your team, which is again my experience. Sometimes you just won't be part of it because you literally cannot, because there's so many other things that you're working on. And sometimes it's because nobody remembered to ask you about the insights or to do some research. And then you find out afterwards and like, this looks like something that I should have been involved in. And then you can then become involved in it at that point. So yes and no. Sometimes you're pushed aside and the insights are given and then they choose to do whatever they like. And sometimes you have to just like keep pushing and fighting and be involved. And sometimes you find out after the fact when everything is already done.
It's definitely a yes and no. Roxana, something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I fully resonate with that. Sometimes I've been in the entire process from that discovery research for the purpose of innovation. When there's no product and we're going to come up with that first inception idea and go from there, go to early sketches, full concept, evolve, and so on. And the ideal by the textbook. That doesn't happen that often. I have a few of those under my umbrella, but less than I would want to have. The other part of it is it really depends if you're at a product company or if you're a consultant. Sometimes if you're a consultant, you can just be in and out. It's like, hey, we have this, we're in the MVP phase, we need some testing done, or we're in post-release, we want to make sure it's received the way we intended, right? So it really, if you want to be in that end-to-end, then you want to have a longer standing relationship with a company, whereas consulting can go anywhere between, a couple of days to a couple of months. It could be years and so on, but it's not always. It could be in and out testing as well.
So true. Joel, something to add?
So I was hoping not to use the words "it depends," but it depends. And what it depends on is large teams versus smaller teams. And so what we're talking about here is it a centralized research capability where teams come in and kind of gather research and then go out on their own again, right? Or is it a federated system where each team has their own dedicated researcher, right? If it's the latter, then you become a kind of a super specialist just on that one digital product, right? If it's centralized, you're not married to the team, as it were. They come in, they get you do your work, and then they take it and they go design it and engineer it and all that other stuff. So it really does depend on the size of the organization, how mature their UX research capability is, and what Roxana said about consulting, because that's all 100% what I was thinking. So.
Yeah, thanks for adding that good point about organizational structure, because that definitely can affect, we heard from Roxana about maybe sometimes it's the maturity or the type of company, org structure matters. And Lade said sometimes you're just the UX team of one and you're trying to juggle lots of products and you just can't see everything through end to end. But it is very much it depends. So this is where we usually wrap up these webinars. I'm trying to keep them around a half hour so that they're more YouTube digestible later for people who are curious. So we'll go around and we'll just get some closing thoughts from each of you and just let everybody know if they're interested in getting in touch with you or following you online. Where should they look for you? So Lade, where can we find you, and any last words for the research curious?
So for the research careers, I think one of the hallmarks, I believe, of a researcher is that openness and curiosity. And so even in how you approach the work itself, not just in doing not just like in talking to the participants of your research or in the doing the work of the research, but in the other parts of the work. Because being a researcher, the job of a researcher is not just the research. There is a lot of stakeholder management and talking to people and advocating and influencing and all of those things. So being open in how you also approach that, that is something that I wish I had known, like when I first started doing research, like how much work it takes beyond doing the actual research. And how much time it also takes, because I feel like more of my time now is even actually spent on all of those other parts beyond the research, especially as I don't want to like start something, but with like democratization of research, that is more influencing and advocating and managing people and expectations. uh, And as to where you can find me, the best place to find me on is LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, you can find me by searching my name, which is Lade Tawak, Ladetawak. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Roxanne, I see you've put your LinkedIn in the chat. Roxana-Maria Barbu, if you were Italian. Go ahead. Some parting words, and where can we find you?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I live there. I guess parting words, I have a few. One of them is I see young researchers, and by young, I mean professionally speaking, just on a rush to move on to the next level. To really, really be good, you have to go through the ladder of knowledge. Otherwise, at some point, people are going to see there's no return on investment and you're just going to stop getting those jobs. And it takes a while, like they mentioned earlier, it takes a while for that to come to surface, right? Like you're not going to know it immediately. So you can kind of be a good presenter and have good people skills and go through and get a few promotions. And at some point, you're going to fall if you haven't taken the time to learn. And I see that far too often. And the other part is there's a bit of a fear in the field that the market is saturated. I think there's always going to be need for traditional benchmark research if it's done well. And then the other part of it is we all have passions and interests. So I'm passionate about housing. I'm passionate about accessibility. I'm passionate about whatever. We all have so many passions, right? So bring those together. Do you happen to also be a math person? Well, being a great UX researcher and knowing how to talk to the AI or data science team and pose the right questions to turn their algorithm upside down as to how it's actually done, that's a value, right? And so many of these aspects, just find that bridge that works for you to have your own niche.
Cool. Thank you so much. And Joel M. Barr on LinkedIn, parting words, and where can we find you?
Well, I put my socials in the chat. Parting words. If you're contemplating going into user research, go into user research. Um, uh, if you're there's not too many fence sitters. You're either all in or you're all out. So if you're going to be all in, go all in. I think we were talking about what made us fall in love with research earlier. One of the things that made me just in awe of my profession is mentoring young researchers from all over the world, and their passion and their fire for the trade, for the craft, it inspires me every single day I get up to do my work. And so if you want to have conversations, outside of this forum here, I'm happy to have them with you. And thanks to Debbie for having me on, and I really appreciate it. And I'm always so touched when I get asked to do one of these. But yes, go under user research. We need so many people. Companies don't know it yet, but we need you so badly.
So true. Yes, it's a little bit of a downtime for researchers, but we will be back and stronger than ever, and we're going to need the talented critical thinkers who can do it. So I want to thank again the panelists so much. Thanks to Joel and Roxana for taking a slice out of your workday. Special thanks to Lade for staying up late with me in the Central Europe time zone, and our panel and some of our guests in the live Google Meet, who I think are mostly from my time zone as well, or close to it. So thanks for staying up late. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube later on, it'll be on YouTube in about 2 weeks. Please leave comments, press like, and if you have a question for one of the panelists and it's on YouTube, I will track them down and get you the answer.
And
But
subscribe.
What?
And subscribe.
Right. Thank you. And of course, subscribe over to YouTube at CX-CC. Check out our Patreon, which is free. And of course, there's lots of other links at deltacx.com/links. We've got our online communities, which are free, and lots of other ways in which we try to connect with people and help them out. So I'm going to press the stop recording button. And thanks again to everybody for joining. Ciao, ciao.